Hello and welcome everyone. On this channel, we like to talk about writing, learning, and creating. Coming at you with yet another writing-based video. My name is Slegaitis-Smith, and let's pop into it. Today's order of business is to talk about protagonists. What are they? What makes them good? What makes them bad? And how can you improve yours? First things first, let's do a little definition work. According to Webster Dictionary, a protagonist is the main character of a story. Yep, that's about it. However, that is not it if you actually want to make a good one. Just because of the fact that you have a character as your main character doesn't mean that they're doing their job right. Honestly, if it's your early work, speaking for myself too, they're probably not doing their job right. So, let's talk about the different types of protagonists and how they can actually do their job. Just like how we talked in the past about how function needs to be an important part of your character, whether you're making a flat character or a round character. So in order to determine if your protagonist is doing their job, we are going to be looking at do's and don'ts. Every job comes with specific do's and don'ts. Teaching, do, show up on time. Don't, be a grumpy puss about it. People don't want to learn from grumpy pusses. Just not a thing. Nobody likes that. Construction worker, do wear your safety gear. Do not put yourself in unnecessary risk. Very basic things. Your job gets done much better if you're not doing risky stuff that will get you hurt and take you off the job. So, what are the do's and don'ts of the job protagonist? Do/don't number one, low agency characters. Agency is a term that we use to describe how much control an individual character has over the circumstances that they are experiencing. A high agency character is one that has a lot of control over what is happening to them in their story. Usually they are able to make all the choices or most of the choices about what is going to be happening in the story or what is happening to them. They are in control of the situation, even if they are not per se in control, like something crazy bad or crazy weird happens to them, and the crazy weird is out of their control, but they are able to take charge of that situation and turn it around into something that favors them or into a way that they can get out of that situation. That is a high agency character. A low agency character is one that has very little control over what is happening to them in the story. This will most frequently show up as child characters because children have a lower form of agency. If your parent says, "We are moving to the city over," you don't get to say, "No, I'm staying here." You have to go with them. You don't have that agency because you were a child. However, there are many different ways that you can apply high or low agency in your writing, and sometimes the protagonist ends up being a low agency character. This can be a positive thing because it allows you to play with a lot of different circumstances that you can put your character in and help to move the story along by the things that are happening to your character. However, this can also be a major killer for your story where your protagonist is not doing their job because they have no control and they're essentially a big do-nothing. People don't find do-nothing people interesting. If your whole day is determined for you, if everything you do is determined for you, you are not a very interesting person to someone looking at you from the outside in. You can have so much going on your inner world that we never get to see, but all we're seeing is the do-nothing part. So if you are going to write a low agency character as your protagonist, do a lot of research and do a lot of practice because you're not going to get it right the first time in order to find a good way to do that low agency protagonist. I would say that it probably would work better in a flash fiction or short story scenario to have a low agency protagonist versus a long novel because people will get tired of it pretty quickly especially because it will be easier for you to fray at the seams and not have that good story building that allows a low agency character to work. So don't not do it ever. Just make sure that you apply it well if you are going to do it. Do/do not. Number 2, the antihero. I would love to go in depth with you about antiheroes at some point, but for now, we are just going to be grazing the surface. Basically, what an antihero is one step down from being a villain, still can be a good guy. So this is a character that is fraught with flaws, and sometimes they're really dark flaws, not always. But essentially, this person is, for lack of a better term, a screw-up in one way or another, and it is their positive traits that end up allowing them to be a hero because they still go out and save the day in some way, or they do something that's super redeeming. But anti-heroes, it's really easy to go a little too far and do it a little too wrong, and then they go from being this cool, hip way to do a character, particularly a hero, and instead they end up being gobbledygook. And the reason why is because people tend to take that little dash of flaws and the cap falls off the seasoning container. What I mean by that is, because I'm not doing a great job of describing it so far, because of the fact that for so long, heroes were so good, and for so long, bad guys were so bad, that a lot of people are tipping way too far in the other direction when it comes to making an anti-hero. A good anti-hero that is going to be doing its job as a protagonist is one that has these massive flaws and maybe isn't 100% likable, but they have redeeming characteristics in order to allow you to kind of brush past or forgive the things that are wrong about them or the things that they don't do well. Like maybe the protagonist is an absentee father, and most people would be like, absentee father? Not too good of a deal there. And they wouldn't seem like hero material. But then maybe you find out that they're not actually an absentee dad. They're actually part of a secret organization that helps fight aliens that are coming to the planet. So they can't be at home so much because they're off literally saving the world. That kind of redeeming characteristic allows you to forgive the fact that they're not there as much for their kids as you might think is important. So if you're doing a good anti-hero, they're going to have redeeming characteristics that counteract or pull back from those flaws so that they can be more human and more realistic and maybe even a little bit darker, but they're still not someone who you hate the entire time. Where people who go too far with the anti-hero end up just making a villain but saying that they're the guy pretty much, because they have no redeeming characteristics. They're doing lots of bad things. They are a pretty bad person in a lot of ways, and they're pretty much hero in name only. They don't actually do stuff that is hero worthy. If they save the world, it's probably by accident. So do make one that has redeeming characteristics. Don't make one that is just a pit of darkness because you haven't left your emo phase. 3, for do/don't with characters, is incompatible scenario. Let me describe what I mean by this. So there are circumstances when you put a character into a story. I'm going to start over. Number 3, do/do not for your protagonist. The incompatible scenario. Let me describe what I mean. Every character is in a scenario. That's just how it is. It's the setting, backdrop, all the things that are going on around the character other than the character themselves. It's their scenario. But sometimes the person who's the protagonist in that scenario is the exact wrong person to be the protagonist in that scenario. So, positive examples first. How to do a character in a scenario. If you are writing, I don't know, let's borrow the X-Men. If you were writing a story about mutants living in modern day society, and the world finds out that mutants exist, and there's this whole kabam of things that goes on because people are like, oh my goodness, mutants, scary type thing. The right type of protagonist to do in that circumstance would be either someone who is on the outside looking in other words, a normal human looking at the mutants and going on a journey in order to discover them, or a mutant who is trying to prove that mutants are good, aka the X-Men. They fit perfectly inside of their scenario. They are realistic to what is going on inside of the scenario. On the other hand, if you randomly just plop an alien there, doesn't make as much sense. If your protagonist in that story is a person who just likes to build robots and is trying to create a robot army, not to defeat the mutants, not to aid the mutants, just doing it, not necessarily the best fit. That leads us into the don'ts as far as not fitting the scenario. And actually, one of the ones that I've heard talked about the most is one particular character who I can't remember the name of at the moment because I don't actually watch that series. Not into the zombie stuff. But he doesn't fit his scenario. And I will describe your character traits. You can inform me in the comments below what his name is for those of you who are fans of that series. Basically, this person is incredibly hot-headed, kind of a loose cannon, and yet he is the one who is in charge of these people trying to survive the zombie apocalypse. Now, if you are trying to survive a zombie apocalypse, and let's, God forbid, any of us actually have to deal with that, but if you were, the person who you have in charge of your group, you would not want to be the person who is going to shoot their mouth off constantly. You would not want it to be the one who is too quick to get into a fight. Because you need to stay very level-headed in order to deal with all the craziness and all the fear that goes along with the fact that there could be people outside trying to eat you. You need some help there. You don't need some crazy there. So, for that scenario, having a hot-headed leader is not compatible to the scenario. Not a good protagonist scenario. Obviously, that series is very successful, but people do like to joke about how that particular part is not exactly cohesive in the story there. So when you are making your protagonist for your scenario, make sure you keep in mind, is this actually a person who would help survive in the circumstance, or would it be more likely that they help people get dead accidentally? It's really important that you match your character to your scenario, whatever that scenario may be. Number 4 of do/don'ts for protagonists. Protagonist armor. Now, pretty much everybody knows what I mean when I say protagonist armor. Some of you instantly started laughing and being like, yes! Others are like, protagonist armor? What's that? So, protagonist armor is essentially what happens when the person is able to get out of harm's way just because they are the protagonist. Another way to describe protagonist armor is plot hole city. Because there is no good reason why your protagonist was able to avoid that thing. There is no good reason why your protagonist is still alive in this moment. Your protagonist just lost their entire arm in a non-magic related universe, but it's just a scratch. They can walk it off, you know? No, that's protagonist armor. It comes off super cheesy. Unless you're making some sort of spoof, people don't like it. It doesn't make sense. It creates these holes in your story that no little Swedish boy with a finger can fill. So, you need to be careful to make sure that your protagonist does not have protagonist armor. If they get injured, you need to make sure that the way they deal with that injury is realistic to the circumstance that they're in. If you are in a real-world scenario, you need to make sure that they have real-world survivable injuries. Make sure you do the research to find out where they can get hurt, how they can get hurt, and what kind of recovery period they're going to need in order to be functioning enough to take on whatever their next category is. If you're in a magic or sci-fi based universe, work in that fantasy sci-fi realm, then you need to make sure that there is either a magic or a technology in place to justify why that person is able to just walk that off. And obviously, Protagonist Armor pertains to more things than just injuries, but it's the one where it usually shows up the most. Another thing would be there is a car veering down the road and just narrowly misses your protagonist. Probably the only reason why was because they're your protagonist, and if they got hit by the car, the story would be over because they would be dead or in the hospital and unable to do anything anymore. So make sure that the scenarios you are in are realistic for whatever genre you're writing, and that your protagonist leaves that kind of armor at home. Do not. Number 5, motivations. Every person has a motivation behind doing something. And often these motivations are buried deep inside their own nuggets. They don't even know that these motivations are pushing them to making certain decisions. So one way that you can really add some extra depth to your character is to build in those motivations that they don't even realize that they have. We all have them, and like I've already said, we don't realize that they're there. It's just something that's become a part of us. I'll give you a silly example. I hate tomatoes. Real silly example, I know. But after doing some serious soul searching at one point in my life, I figured out a reason why I might not like tomatoes. When I was a kid, I used to eat tomatoes like they were apples. Plucked them off the vine, huge bite out. And that's how I enjoyed them. And now I can't stand tomatoes in even the teeniest form. I don't even like ketchup or pasta sauce. That's how much I don't like tomatoes. What changed? Well, I have a vivid memory of one time I was eating a tomato like an apple, and it was a super juicy one, and the juice ran all the way down my arm. And I hated that sensation a lot. And that is the last time I can remember liking tomatoes. So, to me, thinking, because I think a lot, I think maybe one of the reasons why I don't like tomatoes anymore, other than tastes tend to change as you get older, is that I had such a negative experience with the tomato there that I have this motivation in the back of my head to dislike tomatoes. Super silly example, but you can apply that to pretty much any facet of your character for a reason why they like something or they don't like something, they do something or they don't do something. Something happened in their past that has made them be like, I don't like, or I don't want to do, or I do like, or I do want to do, in order to give them those extra motivations. Then you can also have very surface level motivations. This will literally get me to my goal if I do this, so I'm going to do it. Or this will literally push me further away from my goal, so I'm not going to do it. And then also play around with the whole, this won't get me closer to my goal, but it's important for this person who I care about, so I'm going to do it, type thing. So motivations can be a huge way that you create a depth and function for your character, helping move that plot forward. However, on the don't side is the lack of motivations. Sometimes we just have our characters do things because we want them to do it. The problem is, a careful reader, or even just a reader who is used to reading, will notice that that character doesn't fit with doing that thing because they know that character. They've spent the entire novel with them so far. And so their lack of motivation will then hurt your story. Not to mention, because of the fact that you can use motivation so much to push your story forward, if you have a lack of motivation in your character, you're going to get to points left and right where you're like, I don't even know what to do next, because there's no motivation for your character to do one thing or another. Obviously, there's other ways to move your plot forward, but motivation can be a huge way to help. So a lack of motivation can be a huge way to not help. Part number 6 of do's or don'ts. 6. However you want to do it on your hands. This is a sign language way. Anyway, choices. Last one for this video. It is important for your character to have choices in the story. This kind of circles back a little bit to our first one about character agency and high and low agency, but it is so important that I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. Your character needs to make choices at some point in the story. On the do side, your character should make good choices and bad choices. Even if your character is a very good person, that doesn't mean that they are exempt from mistakes. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily doing a bad thing if they're making a bad choice, just not the right choice for whatever it is they're trying to do. Maybe they're in a maze and they choose to go right and they should have gone left. Not really a good/bad scenario, it just wasn't the right direction for them to take. And that is perfectly okay, and it helps to make your character more round and more interesting if they make mistakes every now and then, because all humans make mistakes, even you and me. And therefore, on the don't side, things that you don't want to do with choices for your characters is you don't want to have them make all good choices, you don't want to have them make all bad choices, and for their bad choices, you don't want them to all be evil choices. Just because it's a bad choice again doesn't mean that it has to be bad morally. It just has to be not the right choice. Lack of definitional words in English. Gotta love it. Regardless of how you choose to put choice into your story, your character should be making more than one choice throughout your story. At least one a chapter, probably. Obviously, there's different forms you can play around with, but choice is going to be such a huge part in your character that it is a really important thing to include for making a good protagonist. To wrap all this up in a nice little bow, what makes a good protagonist who is doing their job right is one that is going to be keeping your reader interested. What that looks like is going to be a variety of all the things that I talked about in this video, and even some other things that I probably didn't talk about in this video. Your reader's interest is the main thing behind how you need to structure characters and how you need to structure your plot. Because if your reader loses interest, then they're going to put your book down. If you put your book down, they might not pick it up again. And you don't want that. You want them to read the whole thing. That's why you wrote the whole thing. So, make sure that you are doing things that make your characters more human and more realistic in order to make sure that your reader will stay invested in what you're writing. If you have more suggestions about how to make a good protagonist, feel free to leave it in the comments below. If you would like more information from me on protagonists, leave that in the comments below. If you like hanging out with our crew, make sure to hit that subscription button and that bell button. And as always, I will see you in the next one.